Sometimes the person who wants to put you in a grave carries your own last name. I never imagined a single family dinner would be the beginning of everything. My son filed a petition asking the court to strip my rights, fabricated documents, and planned to place me in a care center he thought I would never escape. They called me a burden. They called me an outdated old man. They thought I would quietly collapse on a bed with guardrails. But they forgot one very simple thing. People who have lived their whole lives in silence are the ones who know exactly when the world needs to hear their voice. If you have ever been pushed into a dark corner by your own family, you will understand this story, and you will understand why in the end, the light always wins. Thank you for being here, for giving your time to the story of a father who was pushed to the bottom, yet chose to rise in a way that made the whole room fall silent. If you believe in dignity, truth, and justice, leave a one dot is enough for me to know there are still people who understand the value of light. And if you want to walk with me through the next stories, stories with no sugarcoating and no mercy, only truth in the rise that follows, subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell me where you are listening from. I appreciate every one of you. Let's begin. That night, Boulder Ridge wore the dry cold typical of early winter in Colorado. Snow had not fallen yet, but the sky already carried the gray color of trouble. I stood in front of Caleb and Vanessa's house, still holding the paper bag with the cheap bottle of red wine I bought out of courtesy. Their home sat on a hillside, more glass than walls, glowing like a display box. I looked up and saw my son's silhouette pacing the living room. Tall frame, white shirt ironed so flat it had no place for a single wrinkle. The porch light was already on. Vanessa opened the door before I could knock. Expensive perfume mixed with the smell of roasted chicken spilling out, but unable to cover something else. A thin tension like a sheet of glass covering the whole house. "You're here," she said with a smile, probably brighter than necessary. "Weather's this cold and you still drove up yourself, still as stubborn as when you were in Houston." And I smiled faintly. If an engineer who used to calculate load for rocket launch structures couldn't drive in thin snow, NASA should pay with supermarket coupons. And Vanessa laughed along, though her eyes only skimmed over me for a brief second before sliding away, the look of someone inspecting a fragile item, rather than a daughter-in-law welcoming her father-in-law. Their living room was absurdly large, gray sofa, glass table, white fur rug, everything spotless without a speck of dust. Family photos lined the shelf, wedding pictures, Cancun trips, Caleb posing with his new electric car. None of Martha, none of the old lake cabin. "Sit here, Dad," Caleb walked out of the kitchen, his voice intentionally warm. He pulled out a chair for me, the movement slightly stiff, like an actor remembering his script. I sat down, feeling the cold leather under my palm. The dinner was arranged perfectly. Chicken, mashed potatoes, salad, toasted bread, glasses placed precisely. Yet I saw another image. The last dinner Martha and I had together, her laughing with flour on her hands, saying that after retirement, we would fix the cabin kitchen, replace the cabinets, redo the floors, and she never got the chance. Caleb poured wine for me, for himself, for Vanessa, his hand slightly trembling, though he hid it by talking more than usual. "How have you been, Dad? Isn't it lonely in the cabin? Vanessa and I keep talking about how maybe you should live closer to us." And Vanessa jumped in immediately. "Boulder Ridge has great senior communities, Dad. Lots of activities, doctors available. But in the cabin, if something happened." She let it trail off, her eyes narrowing with carefully applied concern. I took a sip of wine, not bad, but not good enough to cover the smell of performance rising in the room. Caleb did not ask about my woodshop, did not ask about the old students who still stopped by the cabin for coffee. Nobody mentioned Martha. The whole dinner slid by like a glossy TV commercial. Polished questions, polite exclamations, compliments about being busy and successful. but in the short, quiet gaps, I heard something else. The slightly too sharp clink of Vanessa's spoon against her plate. The way Caleb kept sipping wine, even though he could barely tolerate alcohol. Something was waiting in the next part of the program, and I knew I was the unwilling main character. When the dessert plates were cleared, Caleb cleared his throat, not looking at me, but scanning the room as if checking whether everything was in the right place. Then he stood up and walked toward the bookshelf, where, between two hardcover art books, a yellow manila folder sat. He took it down, held it to his chest, and returned to the table. Vanessa gently gathered a few plates, but placed a small brown leather notebook right in front of herself, open to a prepared page. I looked at the two of them, and my heart went cold in a very technical way, like spotting a hairline crack in a concrete beam. No one else notices. "Dad," Caleb began, his voice forced into a kind of fake gentleness, "there's something Vanessa and I need to say. We're worried about you. Really worried." He opened the folder, and on top was a sheet of paper with the Jefferson County Court logo, the center line bold and clear. Notice of competency, evaluation hearing, and my name printed right beneath, Harold Benson Benton, in all caps. I read each word slowly, the way I would read a load-bearing diagram of a bridge about to be tested. "What is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why have I never heard of this?" Vanessa leaned toward me, placing her hand on my wrist in a gesture of comfort. "Don't panic, Dad. This is just a procedure. Dr. Lowell, our family counselor, told us that for elderly people showing signs of mild confusion, a competency evaluation helps protect them." The living room door opened, and a middle-aged man walked in. Short salt and pepper hair, light gray suit, blue tie, leather briefcase in hand. And he did not look around the house like a visitor, but walked straight to the table as if he had rehearsed standing there many times. "Good evening, Mr. Benton," he said without offering a handshake. "I'm Dr. Lowell. I specialize in geriatric psychology and family counseling, and today we'll talk a little, all right?" My hand was still on the notice, the paper stiff and cold. "I don't recall agreeing to invite you," I replied, "and I don't recall the court sending this to me." "You forget a lot of things, Dad," Caleb cut in, his voice shifting to irritation so fast he could not hide it. "That's the point. Vanessa and I are just trying to help." Vanessa opened the leather notebook, the page full of neat lines, item after item. She inhaled deeply, her voice trembling in a professionally practiced way. "Dr. Lowell, we prepared a list of recent incidents. Last week, Dad left the gas on at the cabin for hours. The whole house filled with gas. The neighbor had to call me. Dad was reading the paper and didn't even notice. And the time he dialed the wrong number and thought, I was... Martha." I closed my eyes for 1 second. "Vanessa," I said slowly. "The cabin hasn't used gas for more than 20 years. Martha insisted we switch. The stove is electric. The oven is electric. The gas line was cut. The pipe sealed. I welded the cap myself. And you've been there enough to know that." Her face flickered. Then she forced a crooked smile. "I mean, the outdoor gas stove, Dad. The little one you use to make coffee when you fish? The camping stove I got rid of years ago because Martha said we didn't need it," I said, looking straight into her eyes, her pupils shaking for a second before darting away. Dr. Lowell nodded slightly and wrote in his notebook, murmuring, "Denial, classic defensive reaction." "And the driving," Caleb jumped in, grabbing what he thought was solid ground. "A few weeks ago you called me panicking, saying you didn't know where you were. You thought you were in Fort Collins when you were only a few hundred meters from the cabin. I had to talk to you for 20 minutes to calm you down." "Caleb," I said, and for the first time that night used the tone that used to silence young engineers in Houston, "I called you that day to ask for the address of the new hardware store in the suburbs. You sent the wrong batteries, remember? You even joked my navigation was worse than a faulty blueprint." His face went pale. I don't remember." "Let me help your memory." I took my phone from my pocket and opened the recordings. I dislike texting, so I often record calls when I need to remember details. Here, the call from the 15th of last month, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. You laughed hard when I said you should retake a navigation class. The living room fell silent, his voice on the phone recording crystal. Clear, cheerful, nothing like a son reassuring his confused father. Vanessa shot him a sharp look, then immediately turned to the doctor. He's obsessed. He records everything. It's a sign he doesn't trust anyone. Dr. Lowell nodded as though he had just received a strong piece of evidence. Collecting proof to reinforce his worldview instead of accepting reality. Very common in early cognitive decline. And the bills? Vanessa flipped to another page. The cabin's electric bill went unpaid for 2 months. There was a shut-off notice. The mailman brought it to our house. If we hadn't paid, Dad would be sitting in the dark by now. I looked at her slowly, as if inspecting a weld. The mailman does not bring mail to your house, I said. He brings it to the cabin every day at 2 in the afternoon for 15 years. His son used to attend the woodworking class. Martha and I held on weekends at the lake cabin. He adored Martha like a mother, and for 15 years he has never misplaced a single letter of ours. We even gave him that engineer Lego set. He called me sir more times than Caleb ever did, I said. Vanessa pressed her lips together, and I continued. I haven't seen the electric bill for 2 months. I thought I had switched to auto pay because I signed that form the same day I signed the solar energy contract. But now I understand. The bill didn't disappear. It just changed addresses. The blood drained from Vanessa's face. Dr. Lowell folded his hands, sitting like a man who had already reached a conclusion. Mr. Benton, he said in a tone used to deliver someone's lab results, I understand you feel misunderstood, but denial, believing others are conspiring against you, combined with the incidents your son and daughter-in-law recorded, all of it forms a very clear picture. I believe an official competency evaluation is necessary to ensure your safety and your assets. My assets, I repeated. Yes, because your son, in the case of limited capacity, may be designated as conservator. Caleb glanced at Vanessa, and the exchange in that fraction of a second was enough for me to read. People say fatherhood teaches a man to read silence. I had been a father long enough to hear the silence screaming. An ambulance siren wailed from a distance, first a thin line behind the wind between the mountains, then louder, filling the glass windows like stage lights. Caleb checked his watch. They're here, he said with forced calm. Dr. Lowell requested permission from the court to conduct a preliminary evaluation at the facility. Just a few days, Dad. After that, if everything is fine, you'll come back to the cabin. Vanessa moved behind me, placing her hand on my shoulder as if steadying a frail patient. Think of it as a short vacation. They have nurses, caregivers. You won't be alone. Remember when you misdialed and thought I was Martha? It broke my heart. You need someone around you. I stood up, my feet slightly numb from sitting, but my back still straight. When did you file this? I raised the notice. You don't need to worry about paperwork, Dad, Caleb snapped lightly. We handle it. That's why I'm still your son. Once that line might have softened me. Not tonight. The doorbell rang. Vanessa turned back with a wet smile and dry eyes. That's the medical team. Please don't argue anymore. Everything has been arranged for your good. They entered the house, 2 paramedics in uniform pushing a folding gurney. One held a clipboard, eyes scanning me. The doctor, then Caleb. Mr. Harold Benton? He asked. We're here under court order to transport you to Silver Oak Pines for a temporary competency evaluation. Court order, I echoed. Dr. Lowell nodded as if confirming this was entirely routine. Just procedure, Mr. Benton. If you refuse, it will be recorded. Not in your favor for the hearing. Best to cooperate. Caleb stepped closer, placing his hand on my arm. The same hand I once used to guide him across streets, to steady his first bicycle when he trembled. Oh, now squeezing like a cuff. He leaned to my ear, whispering so only I could hear. You can't fight the system, Dad. Some sentences don't need volume to make noise. It struck a deep place in my chest where Martha's laughter once lived, where Caleb's childhood dad echoed, where the lake wind whispered. I looked him in the eye. "The system," I said softly. "Son, I spent 40 years calculating how much force a launch structure can take before it snaps. Don't teach me about systems, but I did not fight the paramedics, not because I trusted them, but because sometimes to test a bridge, you must step onto it and feel the vibration." As they helped me to the door, Vanessa hurried to pick up my old coat, digging through the pockets to ensure there was nothing dangerous. Her fingers touched a small, cold object. "Oh, this old coin," she flipped it carelessly. "Just a keepsake." "Martha gave it to me," I said, my voice rough. "Before her last radiation session, she told me to keep it." Vanessa shrugged. "Keep it then. Just don't swallow it." She tossed it back into my pocket like throwing away something worthless. When they lifted me onto the gurney and the wheels rolled across the threshold, I heard the faint metallic tap against my rib, a tiny ting but unmistakable. I slipped my hand inside my coat, fingers closing around the cold coin. The ambulance door slammed shut with a heavy thud. Outside were the yellow porch lights of Caleb's house, the silhouettes of him and Vanessa, standing with perfectly performed concern. Inside was the smell of plastic, antiseptic, and the engine humming. I clenched Martha's coin in my palm. They thought they were sending a confused old man to a care facility. They didn't know they had just sent me into my first hearing room. I closed my eyes, not from fear, but to remember the cold metal in my hand, the only real thing tonight. Silver Oak Pines Care Center sat on the edge of the city like a clumsy excuse for the word care. Outside, pale green walls, a few crooked pine bushes, a sign with a silver leaf shaking in the winter wind. If you only drove past, you might think the place was fine, but the smell didn't lie. When the ambulance doors opened, the first thing that hit me wasn't the cold air, but a thick mix of disinfectant, cold hospital food, and an older scent, the smell of people left alone for too long. Silver Oak Pines Care Center, new intake, a young nurse with dark circles said, as if reading a shipping label. They pushed my gurney down a long hallway with low ceilings and flickering neon lights, doors half closed on both sides. TV sounds too loud, someone groaning, metal clanging somewhere far down the corridor. I looked up at the ceiling tiles, white squares, one stained yellow as if from rainwater years ago. Silver Oak Pines. The name sounded like a vacation lodge, but the ceiling told another story. At the intake desk, a raspy voice spoke before I even saw the face. "Put the old man in prep. Belongings, papers, everything in the bin." The words "in the bin" scraped like a dull knife against metal. Not a policy, but a way of shelving people with medical waste. The man appeared behind a plastic shield, big, wide-shouldered, sweat shining under a too-tight polo. His plastic name tag read, "Frank Murphy, orderly." Frank looked at me the way someone looks at a dented shipping box. "All right, Grandpa, check-in time. Wallet, phone, watch, belt, everything in here." He shoved a clear plastic tray at me like the kind used at airport security, except here there was no scanner, only tired eyes. "My name is Harold," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mr. Harold." "Whatever," Frank snorted. "Everyone here is Grandpa or Grandma. Easier to call." A lazy kind of insult, but sharp enough to sting. My name had been on hundreds of blueprints and dozens of reports, and here it was reduced to a generic label. Before I could respond, I heard the familiar click of expensive heels behind the paramedics. Caleb and Vanessa walked in through the side entrance, following the crew all the way. They hadn't waited in the car, hadn't gone home to prepare. They came along, just changing the door they used, to better handle paperwork and watch me, to the very end. Vanessa stood right behind Frank, clutching her purse. "Dad, just give everything to Frank. They're very professional here. Caleb and I will handle finances and paperwork. You just rest. Frank opened my wallet, pulled out cards, photos, shoved everything into a plastic bag labeled with my room number. He unbuckled the old watch Martha gave me when I turned 40, as if removing an accessory from a mannequin. Phone? I want to keep it. I tightened my grip on my pocket. Can't policy. You don't need to worry about anything outside here. Vanessa stepped forward with a razor-thin smile. Dad, give it to me. I'll keep it safe at our place. That phrase, keep it safe, was one I'd heard too many times in life, and something always vanished after. I looked into her eyes. For a moment I thought I saw guilt. Then it passed like a shadow. I let go. The phone dropped into the tray, the plastic clacking like a lock, snapping shut. A nurse pushed me into a changing room. Clothes off, Mr. Benton. Your belongings will be stored. Put on this gown. The door didn't lock. I stood there, a 71-year-old man under harsh fluorescent light, taking off coat, sweater, shirt, pants, one layer at a time, everything folded into a small stack on the chair, a miniature version of my life. The hospital gown was thin, tied in the back. The ties were too short. I pulled and knotted them, but my back still showed. Cold air slipping in through the door crack, feeling no different from standing bare in the winter yard, except at least outside it would have been voluntary. Frank waited outside the door without bothering to turn away. Hurry up, Grandpa. This isn't a hotel. He glanced at the neat pile of clothes I had folded. You don't need to fold them that nice. Nobody cares. A simple line, but it poured cold water on a small, lifelong habit I always kept to respect myself. Folding clothes flat, even when no one looked. They led me down another hallway to a desk stacked with files, where a woman with her hair tied high, thin-framed glasses, and a cheap suit stood with a thick stack of papers. Her nameplate read, Linda Harlan, Facility Director. Mr. Benton, these are admission forms, authorizations, insurance information. We need your signature here, here, and here. She flipped pages so fast I couldn't read them, but one line hit me square in the eyes. Durable power of attorney. Healthcare and financial. I stopped my hand. What is this? You already signed that, Dad, Vanessa cut in. Years ago, when you had heart surgery, this is just an update. I looked down at the lower right corner where a signature, Harold Benton, already sat. It looked like mine, but wasn't. The loop on the H was too round, the tail of the D too clean, missing the faint tremor my hand had carried since the accident 10 years ago. This was someone's practiced imitation. Director Harlan glanced at me, her eyes skipping like a clock hand jumping a notch. Just a backup copy, Mr. Benton. The court already has the original. We only need your agreement with treatment terms. I smiled, the smile of someone who had read thousands of contracts and once caught an entire plant's electrical flaw from a single misaligned number on a corner page. If the court has the original, I want a copy for my lawyer. Harlan raised a brow, and for a second the professional mask slipped, revealing steel beneath. Here we work with your family, Mr. Benton. Your son and daughter-in-law have provided everything needed. Family. The word sounded more like an indictment than reassurance. I signed the required spots to avoid giving them non-cooperation. But next to the POA field, I simply placed my pen down and marked a tiny line beside the forged signature, my own version of the dot we engineers used in the old days to mark which blueprint had been inspected. This would be my dot. Then came the room. Room 314, they said. A single bed, thin mattress, frayed sheets, a metal cabinet, a wobbly wooden chair, a small window with a dull aluminum frame looking out at a brick wall, no pine trees. Silver oak pines existed only on the sign outside. The room held nothing but concrete and cheap paint. Blanket. Frank tossed a thin blanket onto the bed and left. The door shut with a click, the lock louder than my heartbeat for the first time in years. I sat on the bed, the mattress squeaking, my back cold. I pulled the blanket over myself, but it was as thin as paper. 1 hour passed, 2 hours. No one came. I wasn't asking for much, just a warm cup of water or a kind sentence. The hallway light spilled through the door gap in a long stripe on the floor like the chalk outline around an accident scene. From the shared bathroom down the hall came a moan, dragging footsteps, then a heavy thud, silence, then ragged breathing. "Help! Someone!" A man's voice, old, weak, but clear. I sat upright and waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. No footsteps, no wheels, only the sound of a TV blaring an antacid commercial. "Help!" His voice thinned. I stood, went to the door, tried the handle. Locked. I knocked. "Hey! Someone fell in the bathroom!" The hallway stayed cemetery quiet. I knocked harder. Finally, Frank's slow shuffling approached, coffee in hand, eyes glued to his phone. "What is it, Grandpa?" "A man in the bathroom. He fell. He called for help." Frank shrugged. "Old Brown? He always yells. Guy probably likes the floor better than the bed." He chuckled at his own joke. "Go to sleep. Mind your own business." He turned away. I gripped the handle. If it weren't locked, I would have gone myself. But here an old man couldn't even help another without permission. The moaning faded, then stopped. In that silence, I heard what I had been trying not to. In a place like this, death itself could be treated as a cost-saving measure. I returned to the bed, leaned against the cold wall, blanket still too thin. I pulled my hand inside my gown, and my fingers touched something hard, round, cold. Martha's coin. They took my wallet, my watch, my phone. But the coin had slipped past the plastic tray, falling to the corner of the gurney when they pushed me in. I had picked it up before the ambulance door closed, feeling as if I had recovered the last piece of my life. I held the coin under the sick yellow light. It wasn't the compact Morgan-type people usually collect, but a special version. The 1984 commemorative edition, the kind minted almost twice as thick as a regular silver dollar, the one we bought at the antique fair that year, amid the early winter cold and the loud voices of vendors. But tonight, something was different. The light along the coin's edge didn't reflect evenly, and at one tiny spot the metal looked slightly darker. And the old engineer in me spoke up. I slid a fingernail into that edge and pressed lightly. A very soft click sounded. The edge separated along a line thin as a hair, and my heart stopped, half a beat. I twisted gently and the outer shell slid aside, revealing a small black disc no thicker than a folded credit card, with delicate gold circuits running around it. In the center was a symbol I could never mistake, the logo of Cruz and Hartwell, the cybersecurity firm Martha once mentioned. Oliver Cruz, the tech attorney, Martha's old friend, the one who helped us set up the cold wallet for the investments Caleb and Vanessa never knew existed. I tilted the coin and a tiny row of numbers appeared. When the light hit just right, the sequence Martha had made me memorize years ago. "Just a memory game for old folks," she joked. I had thought she was only worried about the bank. Now I understood Martha wasn't just worried about the bank. She was worried about this day. I rotated the coin again, and the black disc popped out a little more, revealing a narrow slot meant for an ultra-thin cable, the kind only tech kids or cybersecurity lawyers like Oliver used. I didn't need to plug anything in. I only needed to know it was still here, holding everything Caleb had no idea about. Private keys, account lists, and one encrypted contact. Oliver Cruz, New York. I closed the coin, and the small click that followed sounded exactly like the chambering of a round in a gun they failed to search. Out in the hallway, a cart rolled by, its wheels squeaking. The TV switched channels again. Nobody said sorry to the old man in the bathroom. Nobody mentioned him again. I stared at the ceiling where the water stain looked like the map of a country slowly sinking. Caleb thought he had simply arranged a safe place for me. Director Harlan thought I was just a number on a file. Frank thought I was just another old man he could order around. But this old man, could read forged signatures, could hear the silence of the hallway, could feel when a system was about to break. And this old man was holding in his hand the key to break not only the cage he was in, but also the hand pulling the strings of that cage. Here at Silver Oak Pines, tonight, there were two kinds of people. Those who had accepted this was where they waited to die, and those who hadn't. I looked at the coin and gripped it so hard the metal edge pressed into my skin. "Martha," I whispered into the cold emptiness of the ceiling, "I promise you, I won't just win back my freedom. I won't let them keep treating people like throwaways." The old heater rattled, struggling to push a thin breath of warmth into the room. I closed my eyes, and my own pain shrank compared to the silenced moan down the hall. That night, inside this care center that was in truth a prison, something changed. I was no longer just a victim. I began to become an observer, and for me, the distance from observer to system designer has never been far. Room 314 was so cold, I felt as if I were breathing with bone. The fluorescent light above flickered in slow pulses, reflecting off the peeling paint like pieces of memory someone had tried to scrape away, and the smell of bleach cut into every breath, sharp and stinging enough to make anyone living here long enough forget what real air outside tasted like. When Emily Reyes walked in, I thought my eyes were tricking me, because in this place people were used to blank faces, tired faces, faces that had already given up. But Emily carried a faint trace of coffee, something human, and a pair of eyes that knew how to look directly at pain without flinching. She set the stack of bedsheets down and leaned close to my ear. "Mr. Harold, I brought you something." Under the sheets was a burner phone no bigger than a matchbox. I froze because in a place like this, a phone was no different from a loaded gun. Emily slid the pillow from under my head, pulled a small medical blade from her pocket, and sliced a seam thin as a hair. "I'll hide it, but you have to stay still. If they find out what I'm doing, I lose more than my job." I meant to ask why, but before I could speak, she stopped. Her fingers brushed the faded rubber band on her wrist, the habit of someone hiding an old wound. "There was an old man I cared for," Emily whispered. "They forced me to sign a false report about his condition. 3 days later, he died quietly of an infection. No one was held responsible. I signed. Her voice tightened. "Mr. Harold, this place kills people legally. If I help you, it's so I can sleep at night." I couldn't say a word. This girl wasn't just saving me. She was saving her own soul. Emily hid the burner phone inside the pillow's stuffing, stitching it shut with tiny, perfect seams no one could spot with the naked eye. When she placed the pillow back under my head, she said, "You get one chance. Don't waste it." And then she vanished as if she had never been there. 3 a.m., the hour when Silver Oak Pines was quiet in a way only a morgue would understand. I turned my head, slid my hand into the stitches Emily had sewn, and felt the plastic edge of the burner phone like a blade hidden in a sleeve. I dialed 3 rings, then a voice cut through the night, rough from sleep, but sharp like a knife honed by will. "Harold?" I inhaled deeply. This was not an ordinary call. I was calling Oliver Cruz, my family's attorney for 15 years, the man who held Martha's entire estate plan, who understood every legal flaw Caleb might exploit, and the only person Martha trusted with the original Martha protocol. "Oliver," I said slowly, "they locked me up." I heard a safe door open, the thump of hard files hitting a desk, the sound of a man shifting from sleep to war. "Listen carefully," Oliver said. "We're activating the Martha protocol." Those 4 words pierced my chest like a cold needle. My memory snapped back. Martha, in our winter kitchen, the warm light shining across her face as she set the old coin on the table, opened it, and showed me the tiny green chip no bigger than half a fingernail. "Harold, if one day they see you as a burden instead of a partner, If they want to get rid of you for convenience, you use this. It keeps you alive. I had laughed then, stupid in my innocence. Tonight I saw it clearly. Martha had foreseen everything. Oliver pulled me back to the present with a rapid, clipped voice. I'm freezing any accounts at risk. I'm blocking every transaction tied to the POA. I'm hiring Dylan immediately. That kid can dig up hell if I tell him to. Keep the phone on you. We don't have time. 12 minutes later, the burner phone vibrated again. I answered. Harold, listen closely. Oliver spoke slowly, but his voice was tight like a steel cable before it snaps. Vanessa was fired for skimming $92,000 from client funds. We have original records. She can't deny it. I clenched the coin. Caleb owes $1.4 million to a syndicate, not soft debt. The kind where if he's late by 2 days, they come for fingers. I stayed silent. My son, the boy who once sat behind me on the old boat on Pinebrook Lake, now indebted to a syndicate? Worse, Oliver continued, the POA they used to sign off the lake house sale is forged. I have the real one. And, his voice dropped to a grave note, they sold the house for $1.8 million with $550,000 in cash. The rest is a disguised seller financing deal. In reality, the syndicate is behind the shell company, holding the right to seize the property if Caleb misses payment. My lungs felt squeezed, but Oliver wasn't finished. I checked the notarization date. Harold, they sold the house 3 days before the dinner trap. I closed my eyes. 3 days. 3 days before the gas stove, the driving scare, the unpaid bills. 3 days before the ambulance. 3 days before they constructed a senile old man narrative. Meaning, they didn't lock me away to get money. They locked me away to hide the fact they had already stolen it. Oliver spoke again, his voice like a final indictment. Harold, this isn't betrayal. This is a planned liquidation, and you are the witness they need, buried alive. I lowered the phone. The fluorescent light flickered once more, its cold brightness slicing across the room. My heart didn't beat faster. It beat more precisely, like a hammer striking hot steel. I stared at the ceiling and whispered, not just for me, for everyone trapped in this cage. Martha's coin lay in my hand, heavy, cold, alive like a steel current. War had officially begun. I once told the young engineers at NASA a sentence that tonight, in room 14, I finally understood completely. To survive inside a broken system, you don't look at how it operates. You look at how it is dying. Silver Oak Pines does not resemble a nursing home. It resembles an old abandoned spacecraft drifting in space, its metal frame rusted, every joint weakened, and each small vibration enough to tell you it is sinking, only slowly. I observed everything with the same eyes that had spent a lifetime analyzing every tremor of a rocket and every deviation of hot airflow inside a combustion chamber. The east HVAC line emitted a very faint vibration, the kind that appears only when a bearing is misaligned. The IV tube of the patient in bed 11 leaked a trail of white salt down the line, a sign of a long-ignored drip no one bothered to replace. The hallway D camera flickered like a ghost, its power cable shorting inside the wall. The oxygen valve was so loose a child could pull it off. The fire suppression control panel had been left in test mode for nearly 3 weeks. No one needed to tell me anything because I knew what was happening. This place was not a care center. It was a killing machine lubricated by neglect and powered by profit. And I understood one thing. Being smart here was a deadly trap. If I wanted to survive, I had to become exactly what they expected to see. And so I began to play dumb. I let my hands shake enough to drop a cup of water 10 times a day. I deliberately climbed into bed 18 instead of 14 at the exact moment the camera turned toward the other hallway. When a nurse asked my name, I answered with a name that didn't exist. Homer. And stared at my feet as if I wasn't sure who I was. The more confused I seemed, the more confident they became. The weaker I acted, the more their guard slipped. Frank, with his belly swelling under his shirt, began treating me like cheap entertainment. He slapped my shoulder and sneered, "Your brains turn into pudding already, huh, Benton?" Director Harlan was quieter, his suit perfect, his smile controlled, but his eyes cold like the freezer door in a morgue. "You just rest. Let us take care of you." Take care? I had seen exactly how they cared, like scavengers stripping the softest flesh first. On Friday afternoon, I heard a faint moan from the room at the end of the hall, the sound of someone forcing herself to endure pain because she knew no one would come, even if she screamed. Old Mrs. Laverne lay on her side, the damp sheet pressing cold against her back. The smell of decaying skin stung the air, and the pressure sore on her left hip, the size of a hand, was pale and oozing. No one had turned her in 3 days. She looked at me with eyes that once were strong, but now trembled like a candle about to die. "My son said he'd visit?" She smiled, a smile more painful than crying. I stood there for a long time, not speaking, not breathing deeply, letting the anger seep into every fiber of my body like cold acid. That night, Emily found me under the hallway light with a burned-black corner. "Mr. Harold," her voice low and shaking, "Silver Oak Holdings is about to go bankrupt. For 3 months they've cut maintenance, cut staff, cut medical budget. The CEO is trying to sell this facility to a real estate fund." She glanced down both ends of the hallway, then spoke like she was exhaling pain. "They don't care who dies. They just need this place to stay alive long enough to complete the sale." I didn't answer. I only looked up at the water-stained ceiling and listened to the HVAC vibrating like old bones cracking. Then I turned to Emily and said, "Do you know if a structure is about to collapse?" I slowly pushed myself upright, letting her see my real posture for the first time. Not shaking, not weak, not confused. "You don't need to demolish it." I stared straight into the darkness of the hallway where Frank liked to stand and laugh. "You just need to hit the right beam." Emily said nothing, but she understood. I was no longer surviving. I was preparing to strike back. I have always believed that great battles do not begin with gunfire. They begin with a small sentence that shifts the entire map of power. And for me, that sentence arrived on Saturday morning when the burner phone vibrated softly beneath my pillow. I waited until Frank's footsteps faded before bringing the phone to my ear. On the other end, Oliver no longer sounded like a keeper of the law. He carried the voice of a man pushing open a steel door everyone once believed could never move. "Harold, I need to tell you something right now. It may flip the entire game," he said. I held my breath. Oliver's voice dropped a tone lower. "You are not only a victim of Silver Oak, you are a shareholder of it." For a few seconds I thought I misheard. "Oliver, what did you just say?" "Harold, listen carefully," he said slowly. "I trace back Martha's investment chain. There is a small fund called Alpine Heritage, registered under Martha from 22 years ago. That fund invested into a subsidiary. That subsidiary invested into Silver Oak Senior Holdings, and through 3 layers of legal entities. You currently own 11% of the corporation." I sat still on the edge of the hospital bed, listening to the HVAC hum above me like the heartbeat of a beast about to wake. "Do you understand what this means?" Oliver asked. I swallowed. "Have rights." "Not ordinary rights," he continued. "You have the right to demand an audit, the right to call for an extraordinary shareholders meeting, the right to question the CEO, the right to temporarily freeze finances if misconduct is suspected." I closed my eyes, not from exhaustion, but because it felt as if a massive door had swung open behind me. For weeks, I had been locked in this cage like an old animal, but the truth was, the key had been in my pocket for 22 years, placed there by Martha herself. I heard Oliver shuffling documents, paper scraping across his wooden desk. Harold, now listen to the second piece of news. Dylan just sent the report. Dylan never called. He only sent files, and any one of those files could drag a man from a mountaintop to a pit with a 6-second clip. Oliver read each line as if dissecting the heart of Silver Oak. Director Harlan has been receiving bribes from a medical equipment supplier, transferred through a shell company. It has been happening consistently for 4 years. Dylan has the complete bank statements. The air in the room froze into a thin layer of ice. As for Frank, Oliver exhaled long, as if disgusted by what he was about to say. There is video of him kicking the bed of a patient, an old man paralyzed on one side. Dylan has footage from the old camera system. It is undeniable. I looked down at my hands, not shaking, not hot, not raging the way I expected. Everything inside me shifted into a strange state, absolute cold, like standing before the blueprint of a rocket seconds before it explodes. A state engineers call calculated calm, the kind of calm that lets you crush a massive plan with a single small choice. Oliver, I said, what do we do now? Harold, this is when you break the entire system, Oliver replied. Not one person, no, not one employee. The whole Silver Oak. He continued slowly, like a clock hand. I propose opening a full corporate audit, financial records, procedures, medical compliance, safety, maintenance, everything. Once the audit begins, they will panic, and when they panic, the stock will fall. The investment funds will want to exit. The board will scramble for a buyer. I drew a long breath, and that is when we buy them. Oliver almost laughed. Not from joy, but the way a man laughs when he sees a structure finally collapse after years of rot. Exactly. That is when we launch Silver Lighthouse Trust, the shell company I have prepared. When Silver Oak panics and falls into a distress sale, we will quietly take over. Suddenly the leaking room of Silver Oak felt larger, as if the walls had stepped back, as if I was no longer the prisoner of this place, but the man standing on its roof looking down. Harold, Oliver said quietly, for the first time, you hold the initiative. For the first time since they brought me here, my breathing grew deeper, steadier, heavy, but firm. Martha had planned this move, and I, the man they treated like a confused old fool, was now preparing to wield the lever that could collapse an entire rotten eldercare empire. I placed my hand on my chest, feeling Martha's silver coin inside the hospital gown. That feeling was no longer sorrow. It was fuel. All right, Oliver, I said, start drawing the blueprint. We will rebuild justice, from the foundation up. On the other end, Oliver answered with the voice of a man watching a rocket engine ignite. Roger that, Harold. Initiating. 6 weeks inside Silver Oak did not pass like the time of the living. It passed like the time of souls trapped between two worlds. And I woke each morning under the yellowed hospital light, listening to the HVAC hiss in steady beats, to the scrape of old metal carts dragging across tile floors, the smell of bleach, the smell of the elderly, the smell of abandoned lives, blending into a poisonous mist clinging to skin. I became a shadow in this place, a confused patient no one noticed, an old man mumbling at the wall, a body that still breathed, but in that invisibility I saw deeper into the rot of Silver Oak than anyone outside ever could. I needed to remember every detail, every shift, every breach, but I could not write openly, so I asked Emily for a dull pencil, telling her I wanted to draw the old house to remember. When I returned to my room, I gently stripped the outer wood to reveal the charcoal inside, and with tiny scattered strokes, childish scribbles to anyone else's eyes, I wrote down everything my mind observed, the camera timestamps, the blind corners of each hallway, the rhythm of Frank's footsteps in every shift, the strange oxygen light signals. Anyone looking would think it was the nonsense of a senile patient, but to me it was the spine map of the enemy. I hid the pencil beneath the bed frame where the old rubber had rotted into a groove, a place no staff member ever bothered to touch. One afternoon, when the hallway grew suddenly quieter than usual, I knew something was wrong. Director Harlan stood speaking to Emily, his voice pitched just loud enough to intimidate, just quiet enough to deny. Emily lowered her head, her hand clenched, her face drained, and I heard only fragments, sharp as knives cutting through air. False report. Unauthorized. Changes can terminate immediately. I understood instantly. They wanted to get rid of Emily, the only person here who still held a shred of humanity. I could not let that happen. Without a second's hesitation, I let my body collapse onto the floor. A loud thud, echoing enough to turn every head in the hallway. I groaned, limbs shaking, my knees sliding across the tile like it truly failed. Frank rushed out, cursing, "Damn it! Again, old man!" But the important part was that Harlan spun toward me, his anger redirected, and Emily was released. She looked at me, eyes welling with fear and gratitude, and I gave only the faintest blink. "It's okay. Go." The bruise on my hip turned dark purple, but I had saved the only decent soul in this place. In the 4th week, Caleb and Vanessa came to visit, not to visit their father, but to visit their future money. Caleb pushed the door open, latte still in hand as if strolling into a cafe instead of a care facility, and Vanessa scanned the room with the assessing eyes of someone inspecting a model apartment before flipping it. I curled myself on the chair, eyes down, head tilted, the role of the confused old man more important than ever. Caleb crossed his arms and spoke loud enough for me to hear. "See? With Dad this far gone, it won't be long. Everything's on schedule. I'll clear most of the debt in a few weeks." A sentence that was part brag, part cruelty, part burial. I slowly raised my face, letting my eyes stay empty. But inside, something in me cracked. In that moment, I saw Caleb at 7 years old. The boy in the backyard holding a tiny flag, planting it into the rocket model we built together, running circles around me, laughing through the whole afternoon, and I remembered his voice. "Dad, someday I want to build rockets like you." So many years. And now, standing before me, there was no boy left, only someone wearing my son's face with a heart eaten away by something I no longer recognized. I turned away, not because I was weak, but because if I looked one more second, I feared I would break the roll. A week later, the burner phone vibrated beneath my pillow. I heard Oliver's voice, low from exhaustion, yet carrying the tone of a man who had just struck the right beam in a collapsing structure. "Harold, Silver Oak is officially in panic. News of the audit leaked. The shareholders split into 2 factions. The board is fighting over whether to keep or sell the corporation. Our moment has come." I said nothing. I only tightened my grip around Martha's coin. 6 weeks of being treated like a madman. 6 weeks living like a shadow. 6 weeks having my son stand in front of me while I dared not look at him. The audit news exploded just as dawn had not yet stepped onto the grounds of Silver Oak, and the thin light slipped through the glass door, shining on the cracks in the walls, as if trying to expose everything that had been hidden by the arrogance of a corporation that believed it could not collapse. I lay in room 314, hearing every panicked conversation echoing from the hallway, and the burner phone beneath my pillow vibrated to signal that Oliver was opening a direct line to the internal meeting. Silver Oak was being sued by 4 states, carrying more than $30 million in legal liabilities, and Medicare was preparing to revoke its license if they failed to explain on time. The corporation was sinking from the inside. In the middle of that chaos, Silver Lighthouse Trust, the entity Oliver and I built, appeared like a cold shadow, lunging when the prey was exhausted. Oliver made the offer. $64 million for all 7 facilities of Silver Oak. And in that moment, When I heard that number, a door in my memory swung open. Martha's words, Oliver's words, the instructions I once dismissed as a backup plan for a future that seemed impossible. All of it now landing at exactly the right time. I heard Oliver's voice from the night he explained how Martha had arranged everything. Martha left the Alpine Heritage Fund, the fund she built after her successful investment project in 2001. It had quietly grown for 22 years and now sat near 50 million. You and I only need 18 million as the down payment. The rest the bank will loan based on Silver Oak's own assets. That is called a leveraged buyout, a smart launch that buys them out while forcing them to kneel with their own money. When Oliver said that night, I did not fully understand. But now, in room 314, with the dull light falling across the leaking ceiling, I understood everything. Martha had left me an escape route, hidden in years of darkness. The meeting continued in chaos. The board argued, throwing blame like drowning people clinging to broken planks. But the 64 million figure was the command of the market. Either sign or die. The online meeting became a battlefield. Shouting, cursing, microphones cutting out, all echoing through my phone. Director Harlan tried to resist the deal like a dying man clutching rotten wood. "We cannot sell. This is temporary. The audit will settle. We have other ways." But he was only a stain in the violation report. No one listened to him anymore. I heard him break down crying. Not for the patients, not for fear of the facility failing, but for losing his seat. The only thing he ever truly cared about. As for Frank, the man who treated other people's suffering as entertainment, he received a disciplinary summons from the state board that very afternoon. He tore the paper, cursed, slammed doors, but it was nothing more than the scream of a beast whose cage was about to lock. Meanwhile, I still sat in room 314, wearing a thin patient gown, IV taped to my arm, head tilted like a confused man. No one in the facility knew that the senile old man in room 314 was the one buying the corporation. Oliver called back, his voice low and firm. "Harold, they accepted. The board just signed the resolution to sell. Now it is time to sign the purchase agreement." "Where?" I asked. "In your room. Room 314. The way he said it was so calm that I almost laughed. Not from joy or sorrow, but from the absurdity of truth. Silver Oak forced me to lie here like a helpless prisoner, and now, right in the room where they locked me, I would buy the entire company. Oliver arrived with 2 assistants in long coats. They set up an old folding tray table across my lap and placed a contract, thick as a corporate history textbook, on it. I signed each page, with no shaking hands, no blinking eyes, no change in heartbeat. Beneath each signature was the line, "Acquisition Agreement, Silver Lighthouse Trust," and above it was my name, Harold Benton. When I set the pen down on the final page, what I felt was not victory, but silence, the silence of a man once dismissed as useless, now changing the fate of thousands with a single signature. I placed the pen on the tray and whispered only for myself, "They locked up the wrong man." In the dim hospital light, the shine of the pen glinted like a blade. An old patient had just bought the prison that held him, and from now on, everything would reverse. 3 weeks after the acquisition was completed, Silver Oak Pines was no longer the rotten nest I had been thrown into. The entire facility felt like a structure being surgically rebuilt from its foundation, and I, playing the role of a thin-gowned patient, was actually the one directing every incision. On the first day, 3 trucks of materials arrived earlier than the sun, and rolls of navy carpet were carried into the old hallway, unrolling across the floor like giant serpents ready to swallow the stale odor that had clung to this place for decades. The sound of fabric cutters, floor sanders, and cleaning crews echoing from multiple rooms blended into a kind of construction symphony. Rough, but full of life. completely unlike the groans and lazy footsteps of the previous weeks. On the second day, the painters arrived, brushing gentle cream-colored coats along the walls, slow and steady strokes covering the exhausted cracks that had witnessed too much suffering. The scent of fresh paint mixed with damp wood, creating an unfamiliar fragrance that made the old residents pause and breathe in, as if wondering whether this was still the place they lived. On the fifth day, the entire lighting system was replaced. No more buzzing fluorescent tubes like trapped insects, but warm golden lights pooling across the ceiling like a sun frozen in place. Warm enough that I saw an Alzheimer's patient cry in the dining hall, because for the first time in years, she recognized the frame color of her family photo. In the second week, the industrial sanitation team arrived, not the pretend sweeping from director Harlan's era, but a true deep clean crew, scraping every stain, polishing every metal bar, steam purifying foul odors, removing dust from places no one had ever bothered to touch. The old staff watched them with bitter faces, realizing for the first time what standards actually meant. Finally came the ceiling-mounted speakers, sending gentle classical melodies, Vivaldi, Schubert, Debussy, drifting through the air, each piece brushing away another layer of invisible heaviness, and Emily said several residents slept well for the first time in years, no longer startled every time Frank kicked a wheelchair or yelled at a nurse. While the facility revived, the outside world began to notice. One Tuesday morning, Emily rushed into room 314, holding the Denver Chronicle, its front page headline printed in bold. A mysterious investor saves a near-bankrupt care center system. And beneath it was a photo of the Silver Oak Pines entrance, receiving a new sign along with a single sentence that made me stand still for a long time. Someone is repairing a world we abandoned. People did not know it was me, and they did not need to. Justice does not need spotlights. It needs the persistence of quiet hands placing each brick back where it belongs. During those 3 weeks, Emily changed too, becoming more serious, attentive, steady, and most importantly, someone whose heart remained big enough to care for others, even after being wounded by this system. I watched silently, and by the third week, I decided to promote her to deputy director. When I handed her the decision, she froze, her hands trembling as if the paper were too heavy to hold. "You deserve it," I said, and Emily lowered her head, eyes red, whispering, "I will never disappoint you." And the news spread quickly through the facility. Some grew jealous, some rejoiced, some even cried softly because for the first time in years, a good person had been seen. I changed too. I still wore the patient gown during those 3 weeks. But it was only a disguise. The day Harold Benton truly returned, I chose the gray suit Martha had bought me many years ago, the one that had been lying at the bottom of a drawer since she passed. I touched its soft fabric, feeling like I was touching a piece of memory that had never cooled. I put it on, stood before the mirror, and remembered what I had forgotten for so long. I was not a victim. I had never been a victim. That same afternoon, I asked Emily and the maintenance team to mount a bronze plaque outside the facility entrance, right beneath the Silver Oak logo. The plaque read, "In memory of Martha Benton." A place of dignity, and when the afternoon light fell across it, I stood watching the warm gold reflection, as if Martha were standing beside me, smiling. Everything was ready now, the facility renewed, the power returned to me, the good raised up, the cruel thrown out, and only one thing remained undone, a full facility meeting, announcing the new owner, where Caleb, Vanessa, and all the old staff would stand before a truth they could not hide from. A public humiliation, a reversal of power, a slap delivered through truth, light, and dignity, exactly the way Martha wanted me to do it. I closed the door of room 314 gently, as if closing the last chapter of an old life. The announcement day was coming, and this time, everyone would know who truly ruled this kingdom. That morning, Denver was dry and cold, sunlight slicing across the Silver Oak Pines parking lot like a thin glass blade, reflecting gold off the newly replaced windows. I stood on the second floor in a hallway still carrying the faint scent of fresh paint, looking down as a black SUV slowly pulled in. Caleb stepped out first, leather jacket, sunglasses, walking fast like the whole world owed him an explanation. Vanessa followed, carrying an oversized designer bag completely unnecessary for a simple visit dad. Behind them were Vanessa's parents, stiff posture, displeased faces, the kind of people who came to places like this only to judge, never to understand. All four stopped dead at the entrance, and from above I saw their confusion, as if they had walked into a boutique hotel instead of the care center that once smelled of bleach and rotting carpet fibers, polished wooden floors, freshly painted cream walls, warm recessed lighting, Schubert drifting softly through ceiling speakers. Caleb looked around, brows furrowed, whispering to Vanessa, "This place doesn't look like where my dad was kept." And Vanessa glanced down at her high heels reflected on the floor, forcing a smile. Maybe they cleaned up. For visitors. Before she finished, Emily stepped out from the reception desk. Brand new uniform, gleaming name badge, hair neatly tied back. She looked entirely different, confident, composed, standing like someone who finally belonged to the position she held. Caleb marched forward with his usual arrogance and said, "Excuse me, my father, Harold Benton. Which room is he in?" Emily looked at them calmly, flipped through the digital roster, paused, then said with a strangely polite tone, "I'm sorry, there is no one named Harold Benton currently listed as a patient here." The entire family froze. Vanessa jerked forward, stunned. "Not listed? How can he not be? He's being treated here. I even brought the required visitation paperwork." Caleb leaned toward the desk, voice tight like he was chewing each word. "I want to see the director. Now. Where's Harlan? Last time he spoke to me himself. Get him out of here." Emily remained expressionless, her hand resting lightly on the keyboard, her voice soft enough to make Caleb even angrier. "Director Harlan is no longer employed here." Caleb stiffened. "No longer employed? What do you mean?" Emily lifted her eyes, meeting his squarely. "He was removed immediately after the audit. Reasons: misconduct, concealment of patient conditions, and involvement in non-transparent transactions." And Vanessa inhaled sharply, while her parents exchanged anxious looks, realizing their protector had vanished from the map. Emily continued, her voice calm, but each word cutting like a blade. "And Frank, the one who gave you a tour last time, was terminated as well. Patient abuse, caught clearly on camera." And the entire Vanessa family paled. Caleb clenched his jaw. "Then where is he? Who authorized moving him? Just say it straight." Emily looked up, voice slow and deliberate, making sure everyone in the lobby could hear. "Mr. Benton did not leave, sir. He is no longer on the patient roster." She paused half a beat, enough to make the last thread of Caleb's arrogance twitch, then said, "He is now the owner of the entire Silver Oak system." No sound, no breath. Even the Schubert tracks seemed to choke mid-note. Vanessa froze, eyes wide, lips trembling. "Oh, owner? What?" Her parents stood stunned, her father leaning back into the chair, face pale, her mother covering her mouth, glancing around as if terrified of being seen by cameras at that moment. Caleb stood rigid, like an animal shot, but not yet understanding. It was dying, then he exploded. "No way, don't lie. He's a senile old man. Sir, please be respectful," Emily cut in, voice colder than marble, but Caleb was too far gone. He charged toward the hallway, muttering, "I'll find him myself. Let's see who thinks they can—" He didn't get far. Two new security officers, handpicked by me, stepped out from a blind corner. They blocked him with two swift, controlled movements. Not rough, but undeniably authoritative. "Sir, this area is restricted to staff and ownership," one said. "I'm his son," Caleb shouted, voice cracking like shattering glass. "Ownership has not granted you access," the guard replied. In front of almost 40 staff members, 10 patients, and the entire Vanessa family, Caleb was held back like a nobody, powerless in the very place he once tried to control, to have me locked away. Silence thickened. Then, unexpectedly, an old man's voice echoed from the back of the lobby, loud enough to bounce off the walls. "That the son of the new owner? Why's he so rude?" Caleb froze, face blazing red, eyes wild like an animal cornered. He struggled, shouted, tried to salvage the last scraps of power. But the more he fought, the more he became a spectacle under the warm lights. A few patients laughed. Some staff tried and failed to hide their giggles. The whole lobby rippled with whispered amusement. Vanessa flushed crimson. Caleb stiffened like a cracked wax statue. Vanessa's parents looked down at their shoes, wanting to sink into the floor. It was the moment I had waited months for. The moment when the judge was judged, the keeper of the keys was kept outside the door. The superior one became the community's punchline. I stood on the second floor, hand resting lightly on the newly lacquered wooden railing, watching them from above, not gloating, not triumphant, only coldly, quietly firm. Because this was only the first peek. I had not stepped into the meeting room yet. They had not heard what was coming, had not seen the full truth. I adjusted the gray suit Martha bought me years ago. The warm lights reflected off the glass, casting my silhouette like a different man entirely. The rest of the morning would be their real verdict. I stood at the end of the second-floor hallway, my hand resting on the newly lacquered wooden railing, looking down at the lobby where Caleb was still being held back by security, like an unauthorized trespasser with no identity. The feeling did not please me. It made me clear, sharp, awake, a kind of clarity as sharp as a blade. I walked down the stairs, each step slow but heavy, the sound of leather shoes tapping on wood, small but as distinct as a gavel, striking a bench. The warm yellow light from the ceiling washed over the gray suit Martha had bought me years ago, just enough for them to see that I was no longer the man they had shoved into an emergency psychiatric ward that day. When I appeared at the foot of the stairs, the lobby fell silent. Caleb turned around, and for a split second, his face twitched, as if shocked by electricity, his eyes widening, lips trembling, the veins on his neck rising as if reminding him that what he was seeing could not be real. "D-Dad, what are you doing here?" His voice cracked like glass. I did not answer. I simply walked past him. No glance, no touch, no pause, like he was a stranger blocking the path. Emily was already standing at the reception desk, holding the internal system controller. I nodded. She pressed the button. Every camera in the facility lit up. The large screen in the lobby powered on. The speakers chimed, a signal requiring all staff and patients to gather immediately. I turned around and stood in the center of the lobby, the very spot where I had once been labeled a patient lacking capacity. Now every pair of eyes turned toward me, new employees, old employees, patients, family members. Some did not understand what was happening. Some already knew. The rest, especially Caleb and Vanessa, could only stand frozen like carved stone. I spoke, my voice not loud but so clear that every word cut through the air. "Begin the facility-wide meeting." Emily handed me the microphone. I took it. No gloves, no trembling. "In front of everyone here," I said, "I will read what almost destroyed my life." Caleb opened his mouth to lunge for the microphone, but security tightened their grip on his shoulders. He stayed still, not because they held him, but because he knew. This time, there was no escape. I opened a dossier. Caleb Benton, I called his full name, each word dropping cold. "On May 8th, you submitted a power of attorney under my name. Forged signature. Verified by a handwriting analysis expert. Conclusion: 7 points of discrepancy, indicating deliberate forgery. Murmurs spread across the room. Vanessa's face turned pale. I continued. On June 20th, you and your wife agreed to sell the lake house worth $1.8 million for $550,000. A debt-washing transaction. The buyer was a shell company belonging to the syndicate to which Caleb owed $1.4 million. Caleb shook his head rapidly, stammering, No, Dad. Dad misunderstood. I raised my hand, a small gesture, but security tightened on him instantly. He went silent. I flipped to the 3rd page. Vanessa Collins, Caleb's legal wife, I said, looking straight at her. She let out a shaky breath. Terminated from North Peak Advisory last year for siphoning $92,000 from client funds. Verification documents included, all lawfully collected by my investigator, Dylan. Vanessa's mother covered her face. Her father stood frozen as if struck numb. I continued. This March, Caleb and Vanessa brought me here using a falsified Notice of Competency Evaluation. At the same time, they coordinated with Dr. Lowell to apply the internal code Ignore Call Button, the very reason a patient on the 2nd floor died from not receiving oxygen in time. The entire lobby gasped. A nurse began to cry. An elderly man gripped his walker tightly. I paused, then said, All data extracted from internal cameras, emails and system logs. Not speculation, not a rumor. Truth. Caleb was now shaking head to toe, his legs buckling as if drained of strength. Then suddenly he collapsed, knees hitting the floor, in front of nearly 40 staff members, patients, his wife, and her parents. He knelt. Dad, please, I'm begging you. Please don't. Please forgive me. But that plea was not the voice of remorse. It was the voice of someone afraid of losing power, afraid of being exposed, afraid of being seen for what he truly was. I looked down at him, not angry, not sympathetic, just holding one cold truth. The man I once raised has been gone for a long time. Caleb broke down in tears. Vanessa slid into a chair, her face drained of all color. Her parents bowed their heads as if wanting to disappear. And under the warm lights in the newly restored lobby, I understood. This was not just justice for me. This was justice for those who had been ignored, silenced, treated as invisible for years. And today, that silence was finally broken. The lobby of Silver Oak Pines was still crowded with people, staff, patients, family members, all frozen by what they had just heard. No one moved, no one spoke. Only the soft, steady hum of the ventilation system echoed like the long breath of a place being revived after many years suffocating under toxic neglect. Caleb was still on his knees, his hands gripping the new wooden floor, his eyes bloodshot and overflowing with tears. Vanessa stood against the wall, clutching her handbag, her lips trembling uncontrollably, while her parents kept their heads bowed, avoiding everyone's gaze as if trying to shrink themselves into invisibility. I looked at all of them, without hatred, but with the clarity a father gains only after being stabbed down to the bone. I lifted the microphone again. I will say one final thing, I said, my voice neither angry nor loud, but cold like metal striking stone. From today, I looked straight at Caleb, the child I had raised for over 30 years, the boy who once ran beside me while I built the first wooden bridge behind our house, the boy who once called me a hero. Now he knelt before me like a stranger. All contact between me and you officially ends. The silence that followed stretched so long I could hear someone swallow. From this moment, I continued, none of you are permitted to step into Silver Oak, or any facility under Silver Lighthouse Trust, unless you have a lawful court order. Vanessa burst into tears. You cannot do that. You have no right. I do, I said, and I already have. Caleb lifted his head, his voice hoarse, cracked with pain. I am your blood. How can you throw me out like this in front of everyone? I walked toward him, not rushed, not shaken, but with the resolve of someone who has reached the end of suffering and chosen to stand. I spoke quietly, yet loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. Blood is not a reason to betray. Caleb sobbed like a child, the broken sound echoing with desperation. He reached out to touch my leg, but I stepped back, not out of contempt, but out of acceptance that fatherhood can be severed by the greed of one's own child. I turned to Vanessa. She jolted. Vanessa Collins, I said her full name. Before you leave, there is something you need to see. Emily handed me the iPad. I opened an email Vanessa had sent to a bank employee. If we obtain full POA from him, I want complete withdrawal rights without any notifications sent to Mr. Harold. Caleb agrees. That old man will not be needing the money anymore. I held the screen up for everyone to see. Vanessa turned ghost pale. Her parents stepped back half a pace, too shocked to breathe. Caleb stared at his wife as if seeing a stranger. I said, You called me the old man who no longer needs the money. Fine. From today, all of my assets, all of them, will be transferred into the Silver Lighthouse Foundation. The lobby fell dead silent. All that money, I continued, will be used to rebuild this care center system so that the vulnerable are never abandoned the way you abandoned me. I paused, then looked at them one last time. No anger, no pain, only truth. My attorney, Mr. Oliver Cruz, will be filing your full charges to the court today. You will face justice, not in this room, but under the law of the state of Colorado. Caleb froze like a statue with its base shattered. Vanessa staggered back, her eyes filled with the terror of someone who finally realizes she has lost everything. And now, I said slowly and clearly, please step out of my facility. I gave a small nod. The two security guards stepped forward, not brutal, but uncompromising. They escorted, more accurately pushed, the four of them toward the door. The automatic doors slid open. The Denver winter wind slapped their faces cold as the final sting of truth. The internal cameras captured everything. 4 people who once stood above me, now swept into the winter wind, small, defeated, stripped of everything. I stood behind the glass, watching them dissolve into the gray sky. Not joyful, just carrying one feeling, the relief of someone who has closed the rotten door of the past and opened a brighter one for those who deserve it. Justice had entered, and this time it stood with me. 1 year passed faster than I expected. Denver's winter returned, the first snowflakes falling onto the roof of Silver Oak. Though this place was no longer Silver Oak anymore, a new sign hung at the gate, carved in bronze, glowing under the cold sun. Benton Lighthouse Center, in memory of Martha Benton. I stood before that sign for a long time that morning, not to look at my own name, but at Martha's, the name that kept me alive through a long, exhausting life. The reflection on the bronze surface shimmered like a small lighthouse flickering in the snowy wind. Inside, the facility was completely different. Bright, clean hallways, warm gold lights running along each ceiling like a line of guiding lamps for those who had been lost too long. In the common room I heard laughter, not the forced laughter from the day I was dragged in here, but the real laughter of patients, of caregivers, of people who finally knew this place belonged to the good. Emily stepped out of the director's office, still young, but with the steadiness in her eyes of someone who had walked out of darkness by her own hands. "You're doing your early rounds again, sir?" she asked, smiling. "Just habit," I replied, looking at her with a pride I rarely felt for anyone. Emily was now the director of Benton Lighthouse Center, not because I helped her, but because she deserved it. I handed her a thin folder. Benton Lighthouse Scholarship for Caregivers, a scholarship fund for dedicated caregivers who did not have the means to pursue higher training or certification. Emily finished reading, her eyes turning red. "You..." did all this just because... I did it for Martha, I said, and for people like you. We walked together along the West Hall, the place where I insisted a small bronze plaque bearing Martha's name be reinstalled. I placed my hand on the cold metal surface. In memory of Martha Benton, a place of dignity. My fingers trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from memory. Martha standing in the kitchen, placing her hand on my shoulder after a long day, saying, "Harold, light doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be on time." I stood there silently until Emily said something that stopped my breath. "Mr. Harold, I think she would be very proud." I did not answer because if I spoke, I was afraid I would break. That afternoon, the snow fell thick. I returned to my small office by the large window. On the table was a letter from the Jefferson County Court, the final result of the 3-month trial. I opened it. The first 2 lines made me pause. Caleb was sentenced to 4 years of suspended imprisonment, required to return all misappropriated assets, plus 1 year of mandatory psychological supervision. Vanessa was sentenced to 18 months in jail, plus 3 years of probation for financial fraud and intentional involvement in elder abuse planning. The court wrote, "The defendant's actions not only violated property rights, but endangered the safety of an elderly individual. The sentence aims to restore justice and send the message that betrayal within a family is not a legal sanctuary." I set the letter down, not triumphant, only feeling light as snow, falling, melting, becoming peace. I opened the brown leather journal Martha had given me. The final page trembled gently under the pen. I wrote, "Justice doesn't shout, it turns on the lights." Closing the journal, I looked up toward the large window at the end of the hall. Snow was falling, small, thin flakes, bright like powdered glass. Below in the courtyard, caregivers wrapped scarves around patients and guided them across steps that were no longer slippery. I stood there for a long time, looking at the white world beyond the glass. There were no storms behind me now, no shouting, no slamming locks, no deception, only peace, cold like a lighthouse beam over the sea, but strong enough to guide a person back to shore. And I knew Martha would smile. I remained there, watching the snow fall outside the window of Benton Lighthouse Center, the place that had once been my prison, now a sanctuary protecting the vulnerable. 1 year ago, I was dragged in as a useless old man. Today, I stood here as the one who lit it. If you have stayed with this story until the final minute, I want to say one thing. Thank you. Thank you for giving your time to the story of a father who once felt hopeless, once collapsed, but chose to stand again in the quietest way that still reached the farthest. If you believe justice can come late but never loses its way, leave a below. It is small, but it is a light. Storytellers like me. Treasure. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories of betrayal, of rising again, of truths that do not need to shout, to silence a room, subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell me which city you're listening from. Because who knows? Among the nightlights where you live, there may be a lighthouse waiting to be lit. See you in the next story.